And welcome to this episode of the Selling Through Partner Skills podcast, where I am delighted to be joined by Moeed Amin. Moeed has a background in neuroscience and psychology, and I've heard him speak before, and I just thought this stuff is right up my street because it's so close to what a lot of the elements of PQ. So Moeed, welcome.
Thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to the session.
No, me too. So just before we get stuck in, could you just give us a bit more of a background of what you've done and what you're doing now?
Yeah. So, as you said, I have a neuroscience background. Actually, I graduated in neuroscience at university, um, and fell into sales. There's a lot of salespeople I think out there who've experienced the same. And what's funny enough is I really didn't enjoy sales at the beginning. Um, I had to resign from my first ever sales job before they were going to fire me, even though we did really well and I closed a multi-million pound contract. It wasn't going very well. And then when I moved into my second sales role, luckily I was headhunted because of the deal that I'd done in that previous company. I was just starting to get my groove and just starting to really enjoy it. And then the 2007 financial crash hit. And there was a point of self-reflection there for me. And that's when I started to dig through. I mean, the story is I was actually clearing out and tidying my bookshelf, and this really heavy book fell on my head. I mean, it's not a story. It literally fell on my head. And that book changed everything for me. It was an old textbook on neuroscience. And I started thinking, well, what could I learn from neuroscience? Because the techniques I was being taught in sales just didn't resonate with me. I wasn't feeling like as if I was being authentic to myself and my beliefs and values. So I looked at neuroscience. I started digging deep into cognitive psychology, and since then, sales has been an incredible, enjoyable ride for me. So I've been working with multinational companies such as Data Monitor, Informa, CEB, Gartner. I was a sales leader in the last two companies, and for about 15 years, I've been selling quite high-end B2B services and products. And I specialized in particular to selling to C-level executives of small for sure, but also very large multinational, multi-billion dollar businesses, famous businesses like Pepsi, Solvay, Kone, and a whole host of others across Europe and US. Um, so I've been doing that, and about 2 years ago, I decided that I enjoyed the coaching far more than the selling itself, even though I was very good at it. And I put together coaching programs for my previous companies, which became a huge success. So I created Proverbial Door for that reason, and we draw on uh, really science-backed principles for sales success. So we look at neuroscience, we look at behavioral psychology, we look at the psychology of the buying process. But what makes our business really unique is we're one of the few in the world that looks at the mindset of salespeople. So we have techniques and principles and actions that help salespeople radically shift their mindset and present the best version of themselves in every interaction. But we also train and work with entrepreneurs as well. So we help entrepreneurs scale their business by creating the right sales function. But I also work with entrepreneurs who are actively selling what they do as well. And there's a whole topic around that because of their perception of sales and how they conduct themselves. But yeah, that's in a nutshell my experience and my history, and at least my professional history, and what we're doing right now in Proverbial Door.
Brilliant. No, and it's that mindset piece when I heard you speak about it that I thought, well, this is really interesting. Um, I really would like your take on the elements of PQ because
Yes.
that's kind of my way to help salespeople get what I believe is the mindset and the behaviors are associated with a really sort of truly modern approach to selling, help them become
Yeah.
more collaborative.
Yeah.
I think apart from a slightly few different words, we're pretty much on the same page. But
I agree.
hey, we're going to find out in the next half hour.
It's going to be interesting. Yes.
Yeah, no. So let's go through each of the elements, and if I could sort of just get your take on what you believe that is and how salespeople can use it. How you've used it yourself, or how you coach people to bring this into play. That'd be fascinating.
Yes, it will. It will. And what I will do is, because in that 15 years, I've spoken to almost 400 buyers across 10 industries, and across all levels of seniority, from C-level to VP level. So I can certainly give my take on, the words that they've used and what they've described as been important in selecting certain salespeople to work with versus others. So yes, I'd be more, and I've got
Brilliant.
it printed out, just to let you know. So I
Oh
was
no, actually done your homework.
fascinated,
Done your homework.
fascinated by oh
Mindset.
well, yeah.
Mindset part one, preparation.
Oh, absolutely. That's how you build trust, right? That's one of the big principles of trust: preparation.
Let's talk about trust. That's the one I always kick off on.
Yeah.
And so actually, joking apart, you're saying preparation is a way to build trust.
One of, yes.
Wow. Okay.
Because put it this way, and we've heard all this talk around personalization when you're doing cold email outreaches or cold calling. Think about it this way: if I was calling on you and I gave you a generic approach, right? And I hadn't, or actually, let's take it even further down the sales process. Let's say we're going to have a first sales engagement, right? I've managed to convince you to have a call with me, right? We're going to, and this call is going to be really important for you to understand whether I'm someone to work with or not, and vice versa. But let's say I come unprepared, and my questions are generally around open questions, getting you to tell me about your business and what you do. What's your first instinct if I was to do that?
Oh, here we go again. I spend all my time telling people stuff that they should know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And do you then trust me?
I trust myself not to speak to you much longer. I think it's
Exactly.
probably oh God. And I get annoyed because I've made that mistake again. Like, why am I working with people that don't do their homework?
Absolutely. And let me use a stronger word here. It is discourtesy and disrespect. Because in the day and age of radical transparency and radical availability of information, there is absolutely no excuse for me to have not done some homework and get to understand your business, right? Doesn't mean I'm going to know everything about your business, because there are things that you are privy to, right, that are not going to be public. But there is so much that's available that I can draw, at least, even if I can't draw significant conclusions and understanding, I can still lean on that information to say, Fred, hey, I read about your business on PQ and the work that you're doing with salespeople and the training that you give. And I can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 principles here that you feel are core and fundamental to the sales process. Now, obviously, I can't get all that information publicly, but I would certainly love to learn more about that, because for me, trust and comfort with change is one of the things that really resonate with us and the work that we're doing with some of our clients. Now, if I started off with that, even though I've admitted that I don't have all the information, and that's one of the fundamentals of trust, which we'll go into again later on. But just doing that is incredibly important to building and establishing trust. It comes under the category of competence. So there are 2 categories of trust. And Stephen Covey was the one who wrote this. He's the famous author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he once wrote that trust is where character and competence converge. Now, what I've just talked about in terms of doing preparation, that's competence, right? You've got to have the skills to actually be able to prepare and do your research and present it in a coherent and an effective way. But if I don't do that, then already I've shown you that I'm someone who's lazy, right? I'm someone who doesn't really respect your time, and someone who's not going to be able to add value to the conversation, because really you want me to actually add value in the form of insights, add value in the form of advice, where you'll be able to see around corners and see what's going to happen in the future and how that's going to impact you. So that's a long explanation for that, and we can come on to all the other elements that I discussed, but hopefully that makes sense.
No, it does. There's a lot in it. So I'm loving that. I think I got my episode title already.
Okay.
Discourtesy and disrespect. I mean, yeah. Do you want to get that? No, I don't. I want to be the complete opposite. And that's what struck me when you were talking. Is this is a double-edged sword. That if you don't do it, you achieve discourtesy and disrespect, and I'm kind of annoyed with you. You do it, I get that warm fuzzy feeling going, oh, this guy's cool. Why?
Yeah.
Because you've looked at my stuff and you've taken time and effort. So it's this kind of also, but no middle ground, is there? It's you're going to do really, really good or really, really bad.
And you know what the good news is, Fred, is that, and in some ways it's unfortunate, right? There's a double-edged sword here. Even though it's so easy to get that information, I'm still slightly disheartened by how so few salespeople do it. And that's good for those who are conscientious, because actually you don't have to do very much to really stand out, right? Now, if everyone is doing it, then I think that will raise the bar for sales as a whole, and it'll be nothing but great for the sales profession. But right now, I think when you look at the proportion of the masses, so few people do it, and certainly don't do it very well. So by just doing that small thing, that one thing, you stand out from everyone else already.
Yeah. It is, as you say, it's such an easy win. And I mean, I'm in quite a privileged position where I often train quite novice salespeople.
Right.
And one of the things that they, in naivety, I guess, think is a good way to go about things is to say, so, Moeed, I'm your new account manager. I'm like, no, the person will just go, oh, no, 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 here we go. Unless you very quickly say, so what I did is I did a bit of background research, and what I understand about your business is, and then you're like, you could almost deliberately take them on that sort of dip, and then that, now I'm talking to somebody who's professional.
Yeah.
It's a big one. It's
Yeah,
such a big one.
it's a big one. And look, I've and people hear this, just to make this really clear. People hear this and say, "Well, I'm now afraid that if I get something wrong, especially with a C-level executive, that I'm just going to lose all credibility." Absolutely not, right? And we can talk about some of those techniques later on. But you can admit that there are some gaps in your knowledge, but you can also invite them to correct you as well.
Mm.
And I use a technique where you kind of almost summarize and then bring them in to a partnership, right? By saying, look, we've now been speaking for the last 10 minutes. I want to thank you, Fred, for what you've shared with me. I just want to go over what I've captured here to make sure I've understood that correctly, so that we can then have a further discussion on this. And you literally summarize it. And I was speaking to a CEO client of mine where I got something wrong, and he said, let me stop you, Mo. That part was a bit wrong. I was like, okay, explain to me so I do get that right. And you instantly, there's more credibility,
Mm.
right? Because I've shown him that I captured about 80% of the notes, right, and what he said. 20%, yes, was incorrect, but once he'd clarified that for me, he and I had a much closer relationship, or much closer partnership. So that element of vulnerability actually is actually links towards integrity, right?
Mhm.
Because you're still being truthful. You're being truthful for the fact that, hey, I don't have all the answers. And by the way, C-level people don't have all the answers. Your buyers don't have all the answers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be looking to you. So yeah, I think what you described there is important, right? Come with a hypothesis, right? Come with a reason when the research you put together, but don't worry about being accurate. Worry more about doing your homework and showing them respect and courtesy.
Yeah. And what's your opinion on asking people their opinion?
Um, Good question. You've got to first establish that you've got to first show competence before you can ask
Okay.
someone about their opinion. Um, because if you do so without showing some competence, and without sharing some form of hypothesis, you've gone back to the original discussion we had just now, which is around you're asking open questions. It
Mm.
might seem a bit lazy. So when I train people for this, what I say is, come with your own opinion and hypothesis, base it upon fact or research, right? Don't just throw an opinion out there. Um, Justify why you've come across that opinion. It doesn't have to be a lengthy explanation, just one or two sentences. And then you go over, and then you throw it back to them and say, hey, Fred, what are your opinions about this?
Yeah.
So one of the examples I use is, as salespeople, we have more conversations. So say you're selling to a chief technology officer. Um, you have more conversations with more chief technology officers in a week than that chief technology officer has with his or her peer in a year. The insights you have and the knowledge you have is so valuable to that chief technology officer, because every person wants to know what someone else like them is doing, right? What are the things they're doing that are wrong that they should avoid? What are the great things they're doing that's successful that they should really lean into? And as a salesperson, you don't have to throw your opinion. throw in the opinion of all your clients and that whole community and say, hey, Fred, I've been speaking with other chief technology officers, and they're saying to me that, digital transformation is going down this road, right? And one of the things they're worried about is X, Y, and Z. What's your opinion on this? Are you seeing the
Yeah.
same, or are you in a different position, right? So yeah, don't give opinion until you share your own opinion. Don't ask of a other person's opinion until you share your own opinion, but base that on research, base that on some sort of evidence and reasons.
Yeah. There's the old concept of earn the right, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
earn the right to get the opinion. I mean, it used to be earn the
absolutely.
right to then present. I mean, that's kind of old fashioned now. There's far
Yes,
more
it
to
is.
it, but it's earn the right to ask their opinion to then get it, and then that will be valuable. But I mean,
Exactly,
so you're cracking
exactly.
tips on how to do that. Again, it's not massively difficult.
No, it's not. It's not. And in the world in social media, you have a bunch of people that are readily giving their opinions online. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? What separates person A from person B, right? Person A may not have the brand and credibility. Person B does, right? So if you are recognized as a successful entrepreneur or as a successful salesperson and you have that brand that is instantly recognizable and credible, then you can potentially share your opinion, right? Because your success shows that, you know what, that person's opinion is based upon experience, it's based upon success, it's based upon research, etc. But if you don't have that brand, then you do need to earn that right. And the best way to do so is maybe lean on other people who are incredibly successful that you have contact with.
Yeah. There's a rabbit hole here which is about personal branding for salespeople.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm
let,
aware.
let's
I'm into that.
well, no, rather address that one now. That let's shelve that one because I think that is
Mm,
very, very interesting and an area that we need to be addressing soon. But we've already started talking about one element of PQ at the moment. And I guess I am using not I am not guess I am using PQ and people using this to help them create that brand or at least that competence that earn that right to proceed. Um,
yes,
so, I mean, you talked about the elements of trust, and it is just it's worth taking a little
sure.
bit more time around it because you just said that's one. You went, well, that's just one of them, Fred. I mean, what other ones do we need to be aware of?
Yes, so I'll run through those quite quickly because I'm conscious of time and I have a feeling we have so many other things to talk about as well. So there's two things to remember, right? Two categories of trust: character, competence, right? Competence will shelve for now, right? Because I'm not saying it's easier, but it's a little bit more straightforward to find those things out. Character is the hardest one because character is about your character. It's not about your professional character. It's how you are as a person.
Mm,
And when I heard that first, I thought instinctively, well, which one's more important, character or competence? So let's share a quote. When Warren Buffett looks to hire someone, he says he looks at three things: integrity, energy, intelligence. He also goes on to say that without the first one, the other two will kill you. And he's not the only one. So it seems that character is more important than competence. It doesn't mean that you don't have to have competence. You do have to have both. But if you just have competence and the wrong characteristics, then forget about it. You're not going to establish long-term trust. So let's talk about character first. There are 8 principles. Now, I know in the previous podcast there were 7, but that's because I was still doing my research on one last one, and I really needed to get as much evidence as possible for me to feel comfortable about it. So your viewers are now getting the latest, right?
oh,
All 8, right?
I've just changed the whole marketing purpose as well of the title. And
So
my colleague whose podcast I was listening to is getting an email as soon as we finish.
well, I'm gonna have to update it for his viewers as well, so he doesn't get upset with me. But
Send him a short video.
yeah, I think I will. I didn't want to share it until I'd done that research, and we did that about a few weeks ago, actually, quite about a month and a half. So a
Mhm.
lot has changed since then. So the first one is authenticity,
Yeah.
right? Are you speaking your truth? Are you acting and conducting yourself in line with your values and beliefs? But why that's the first one is because as the buyer, is the seller I'm speaking to also conducting themselves in alignment with my own values and
Mm,
beliefs, right?
mhm.
That's why I've put that one first, because it's so important. If you don't conduct yourself in a way that's aligned to how I feel about things in the world and my place within it, no matter how good your product is, I'm just not going to feel that connection. So authenticity is really important. Second one's consistency, right? The best example I can give is account managers who start their relationship with their clients incredibly professional, really thorough. They come prepared with an agenda. They come prepared with value all the time. As that client becomes a loyal and good client after the years, you suddenly start to see that that preparation and professionalism starts to dip. So consistency is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Third one's integrity. No need to label this. Are you truthful? Are you honest? And are you also truthful and honest about some of the things that your product and service does that may not be good as the competition? Now, there's a minefield here you have to be careful about, because if you offer those things proactively, right, you've now got to make sure that when you say, look, we don't do these things, but here's why you don't need those things, you've got to make sure that doesn't sound too biased, right? It's got to be in the interest of the buyer, right? So it's about integrity and truth in the information that you're sharing. Fourth one's responsibility or accountability. Does the buyer feel that you are responsible and accountable to them and the promises that you have made, and will you deliver on them? The best example is we're all there and happy and loud and in the buyer's face when things are going well, but when something goes bad, all of a sudden, it may not be you speaking to the buyer, it might be one of your technical team, and you kind of hide behind them, right? So that response, that sense of responsibility is so important to the buyer.
I just remind me of a football chant. It's all gone quiet over there.
Yeah, look at that,
You're
right?
not winning anymore, are you? Yeah.
And it takes courage to be
Yeah.
to be responsible, and
Mhm.
and buyers really value that from all the ones that I've spoken to, because things will always go wrong. Nothing goes perfect, right? So you want to make sure that the person you're working with and that you're partnering with, as the language you use, is someone who truly is a partner to you, who's going to be there with you during the good times and the bad. The next one is guilt worthiness. This one's a very surprising one. There was a research done by the University of Chicago, which was published in social journals, psychology journals. They found that people who felt guilty about past actions are those who inspire an incredible amount of trust in the recipient. So an example is, if you're a sales manager, one of the things I train entrepreneurs on who haven't got a sales background and they're having to interview salespeople, right? And it's the nerve-wracking process of hiring the first salespeople and growing that sales team. First thing I ask, one of the questions I've advised them to put in there is a competency-based question where you ask, tell me about a time that you felt guilty about a past action.
Mm.
Why was it that you felt guilty? And how did you move forward from that? If someone can't give you a coherent answer or no answer, alarm bells should be ringing. Because someone that doesn't feel guilty about something is someone that's probably got their own best interest at heart. So guilt worthiness is very important. The next one, the seventh one, which is the new one,
Whoa.
right? Drum roll.
I'm making notes here. This is going in capital letters.
Generosity.
Okay.
Now, this has a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
I did it, and the reason why it took a while for me to add this in is because I wanted to test this out. I did a test where, with some control groups, people who only were generous with information but didn't exhibit any of the other seven elements of trustworthy character, and those who were generous and exhibited at least two, maybe three, but even if it's just one, right, they had to exhibit at least one of the others. What I found was that those who just gave generosity without any of the others actually reversed trustworthiness. They became untrustworthy. Whereas those who showed generosity and at least one of the other characteristics, it elevated that trustworthiness by about 13% or something like that.
Okay.
So here's why. We see this on social media all the time, where people say, share things for free, ask the rule of 3 to 1, right? Give something 3 times or give 3 things before you ask for something in return. Here's the problem. If I am just generous, instantly someone will think, oh, why are they just giving this to me? Right? What are they trying to hook me in? What are they trying to bait me in, right, with? Whereas if you are generous, but it's also in addition to some of the other forms of trustworthy character, you've now established that, you know what, this person isn't just generous to hook me into something. They're generous because they are trustworthy. They're someone who wants to be generous towards me, wants to be able to help me as well. One of the great examples is one of my next door neighbors is doing some extensive renovation work in the house. And the way they've gone about this in terms of connecting us with the contractors, being open and transparent, they exhibited at least 4 of those trustworthy characters. But the final thing that really hit home and made me feel so comfortable about them doing this was they emailed over a £50 Amazon voucher to me. And in that voucher, they put a personal note where they said, we understand that this is going to be an incredibly noisy time for you. We wanted to give you this voucher, that you can pay towards ear mufflers or ear guard protectors. But even if you don't, you can use it for something else. Now, if they just gave that to me and didn't exhibit any of the others, I still would have felt uncomfortable because they're almost trying to buy me.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But because they did all the other things, that instantly made me feel, do you know what? If there is some damage to my property or something happens, I can trust that I don't have to fight them to get those things fixed. I can trust that they're going to have my best interest at heart as well as their own. So generosity is incredibly, incredibly important to the trust characteristic. And then the final one is agreeableness, right? Agreeableness is not about being a yes person. It's about stepping into the buyer's world fully. Dale Carnegie talks about this in How to Win Friends and Influence People. Stepping into the world by really listening and it's about empathy, trying to understand their world and how they view the world. Why do they have these certain opinions? The word influence comes from the Latin word influere, which is to flow with. So the analogy I use is to step into, rather than create a dam in the river of their opinions, and then show facts and reasons as to why they're wrong, rather get into that river, flow with them so that you can understand where those opinions are coming from and why they see the world in that way. And then you can start to veer them towards the middle ground. Tali Sharot wrote a book called The Influential Mind. And we have a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, which is designed to filter a lot of the things from our external environment and allow in things that are congruent with our views and opinions. When someone throws an opinion at you, we're trained as salespeople to agree, but then almost a sudden tell them, this is why I disagree with you. Let's start throwing some facts and data. The buyer is just not going to listen to that because they're not congruent with their opinion, right? Instead, flow with them and say, Fred, you give me an opinion, and then I say, Fred, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that, right? Rather than give a judgment, you cannot influence while judging someone at the same time. And just because they've given an opinion doesn't mean you understand the full situation. There's a whole element of psychology in there that I'm not going to delve into. It will take 3 days to talk about that as a debate. But agree with someone by empathizing with them and stepping into their world, and then you draw them to the middle ground. You haven't earned the right to ask them to come to your middle ground because you're the salesperson who's reaching out to them. So have the courtesy and empathy to enter into their world and be agreeable even if you disagree with their opinion, be agreeable in how you address it with them.
That's interesting, because what you've done is just reframe that. Because as you were describing objection handling,
I hate that
look
term.
at your face.
Yeah.
Look at your face.
Oh,
no, because that's 80 sales training was objection handling, basically, wasn't it? And
yes.
It's like, you're going to hear this, right? But here's the answer. That's what you trump them with. But to get your answer in, you've got to just cushion it. So you pretend to empathize with zero actual proper empathy, and then boom, put back what you said, and they can't argue to you. And that's just like an arm wrestle, I think. Whereas this thing where you said like flowing like the river, by saying, okay, well, let's hear what you're saying there and why, and properly understand it. Because actually, my learned answer might be a load of nonsense anyway. Well, actually, it is, because you don't believe that. So you go with it, and then by understanding it, think, yes, I get what you're saying now.
Yeah. You don't have enough information for your learned answer to be relevant.
Yeah.
Right. So, and there are some elements of body language and tonality, etc., that will help you establish a bit more trust. So if you notice, I raise my eyebrows, which is one of the techniques, but it's an inviting technique, right?
Yeah.
And you say, and then the tone of voice where you genuinely are interested, right? So instead of saying, Fred, that's interesting, tell me more about that, right? Or, oh, Fred, that's really interesting, tell me more about that, right?
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more inviting. It's genuine, right? It's not about techniques, it's not about manipulation, it's about being genuine. So yes, I agree with you. Yeah, most of these practiced rebuttals are just not relevant because you just don't have enough information at all.
And well, if you use your practice rebuttal on me, I will probably defend my original.
Of course you will.
What wasn't a position now becomes one.
Of course you will. Of course you will. Right. Of course you will. Because I'm essentially telling you that you're wrong,
Yeah.
right? And even if it's someone that you really admire, right? There's still that initial instinct that, hey, this person's questioning me, I don't like it, right?
Yeah.
Even though I really admire this person. Now, experience and your maturity will step in and say, oh, hang on a second, let me hear what this person has to say. But why give that person the initial instinct? Why not allow them to have the initial instinct, which is, this person wants to know why I have that opinion.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's so cool. So, looking at the elements of PQ, then, I mean, we have spent a long time on trust, and I mean, it doesn't surprise me because it's such a key element anyway, and I know it's such a core part of what you've been studying and what well you're clearly still studying, still developing, still getting your head around. And yeah, I think we kind of covered the win-win, and that we're doing
We
this
have.
because we genuinely want to get mutually beneficial outcomes. We get that one person's success is going to contribute to another's, so there is this
Absolutely.
interdependence. And it's kind of like if you need that explaining to you, I'm not sure there is a place in modern selling. But what was interesting as you were talking about trust, I kept going back to this, or in my head, I kept thinking about this element of PQ, which is self-disclosure and feedback.
Mm,
Because what you're saying there is you're being really honest. You're being really open. You're saying, I don't really, not in as many words, but I don't quite understand that. Explain it to me more. I'm not sure I can do something there. It's this being very, very vulnerable, I think was the word you were using.
yes. Yes. And
Or am I understanding vulnerable correctly there?
you are because you talk about communication being the lifeblood of an organization and self-disclosure and feedback. Um, Vulnerability is incredibly important because when you expose yourself as vulnerable, you also give the chance for someone to want to engage with you a bit more. Now, you've got to be careful about how much vulnerability that you share and with whom, right?
Mm.
Because there are some people that will try to take advantage of that,
Hmm. Hmm.
no doubt. But if you've established that win-win relationship and then you move on to the vulnerability, put it this way, if salespeople are almost trained that if you ask the right questions about a buyer's challenges, they're going to share it with you. Absolute rubbish. They're not going to because you're asking them to be vulnerable. You're asking a
Hmm.
C-level experienced person with a huge amount of ego. Let's face it, they
Hmm.
have a huge
Hmm.
amount of ego to get to that position in the first place. You're asking them to expose why they're not so perfect. And they're never going to do that with you. One of the best ways to get that drawn out, as well as building trust and all the other things that we talked about, is share your own vulnerability,
Hmm.
right? And and when you share that vulnerability, they will feel a little bit more comfortable about doing so. Doesn't necessarily happen instantaneously, but the more you do, the more they're going to share with you. So asking for feedback. So, for example, when I gave that example where I've taken the notes down and I ask them, "Hey, I just want to make sure that I've understood what you've shared here." Um, you're almost kind of implying the vulnerability there because you're saying, "Hey, I'm sure I may have not got this accurate. Let me ask you first before we move on." And so you don't have to say that I'm weak. You don't have to say that I'm vulnerable necessarily. It's just sharing that you're open to their feedback. You're open to their involvement, right? And quite swiftly, what you'll see if you do that correctly, they'll be more open to your feedback. They'll be more open to hearing what you have to say, which is very vital to the sales process.
Yeah. No, it is. And the other I'm back. So I'm writing down here because what I'm thinking is it's kind of, we talked about earning the right,
Mhm.
which is having backup and sort of data and some kind of elements of fact if you're asking
Sure,
for opinion.
sure.
This is now earn the right plus plus
Yes. Yes.
because you've got to have that as your foundation. Now, if you start to use this as your approach, now people tell you the challenges. Just tell me your challenges. Yeah. What is keeping you awake at night? Really? Bad back. Yeah, that's the kind of, well, honestly, that's the answer you'll get, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's like, I'm not actually going to say this is the story. Why should I?
No,
Who are you?
no.
You know, until you started to really get to that position where actually, you know what, I do feel safe. I feel safe in telling you this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some elements that have to be conducted. Yes, the trust, but also, for example, if you start the conversation with insights, right? If you start the conversation with something of value, um, if you if you're open to their opinions, right? So stepping into the world and empathizing and understanding their perspective of the world, right? And really wanting to understand that. If you do those kind of things, then you're going to be able to, they'll become more open to sharing their vulnerabilities with you. And it's that win-win model that you talk about, right? If they feel that there is a win-win element to this, right, where you are interested and passionate about helping them out, right, as well as obviously your own interests, they will start to feel more vulnerable. No, sorry, they will be more comfortable about showing some form of vulnerability because they know that by you asking that question, you're trying to find an answer that will help you sell.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the, his. But sellers forget, right? And I don't understand why when they're not being taught this. The average buyer has more than 5 to 10 years experience buying than you have selling. They know the game better than the average salesperson. So stop trying to use techniques where you're asking them questions that's going to lead them down a maze and down the dark path of selling, right? They know what you're trying to do. But if you show them a win-win, if you show that you want to give them value, right, and you do so in an ethical manner and in a manner where you want to establish trust with them, they'll be far more comfortable with sharing some of the things that are less than perfect in their world. And more importantly, rather than just giving you high-level challenges, they're going to share with you that they're willing to spend money to solve those challenges and why that's the case. And I've experienced this many times where I've asked C-level people outright after going through all this process and say, hey, John, are you willing to spend money to solve that situation? And most of them say, yes, I am willing to spend because it's going to cost me this much or it means this much to us as a business.
So no, again, 100% with you on this. I'm just thinking about the other angle of this element, which is the feedback piece and
Mhm.
giving feedback. So what about if a salesperson needs to give feedback to the customer? Because I think this is an area that a lot of people will potentially be weak on, particularly the, oh, people buy from people and I can't upset the relationship. And anyway, that's my opinion. What are your thoughts on?
Do you have an example that you can share on what
I'm
type of
thinking
feedback
of,
you mean?
well, I'm kind of thinking that somebody's about to make a decision. It's not a good one. And it's not just not a good one because it's not buying from me. It's just that that is a serious
Ah,
thing that they could be doing, which is going to damage them and their business. And I can be subtle about this, or do I just say, hey, Moed, really? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? That's what I mean by that kind of feedback. It's just saying to
right.
them. Or another example would be, we talked about this partner stuff. You know, you keep labeling us partners, and I've got, you know, this partner status with your organization. You give me the medals and little stickers and all that sort of stuff.
Mm.
But you don't help me help you. You don't give me information. You don't play that part of the game. You know, you're closed, really. It's kind of having to give that kind of information back to people.
Yes, right. So the initial analogy I had in my mind when you talked about that was it's like negotiation, right? Negotiation doesn't start until a sale has been made, right? Until someone says, you know what, I actually want to work with you. We're now just talking about the details for formalizing that. And it can happen throughout the sales process, but a sale kind of initially has to be made for it to be a real negotiation. It's the same with giving feedback. If I haven't established trust with someone first, if I haven't done all those right things that we talked about, it's really hard for you to give feedback that's credible and that will be actually heard, right? So how do you so do that first, right? Because actually you can be very direct. And I've done this before, and when I've spoken to a very high performing salespeople, they don't just give feedback from thin air. They've done a lot of the work first to earn the right to be able to then give feedback to that person. Because you don't want to just give feedback, you want to give feedback that is heard and really considered and absorbed by the buyer. So do the right things first by establishing trust, right? Show that you're someone who's competent. Show that you're someone who's worthy of giving that kind of feedback to them. And then, to be frank, you could do it direct or you could do it a lot softer. It depends on the character of the person you're speaking with, right? If you're speaking to a driver, you can pretty much be direct because they're all about efficiency. And you say, look, hey, John, I've got to share with you something that's a bit of a concern for me here. But back that up with evidence as well. Now, if you're a salesperson, unless you have that brand, I always advise that you lean on what other people of the buyer's job title are doing, right? Lean on that because you have a wealth of information, and that's a bit more credible if you don't have that brand as a salesperson. So, for example, you say, I'm a little concerned with that particular decision. And by the way, whether you choose to work with us or not, this has no bearing on what I'm about to say here. When we've spoken to some of the best CTOs out there and what they've done, they've realized that going down this decision route has actually helped them more than going down the other. And let me explain why, because if you go down that route, here are the things that may occur. And this is what they've experienced, right? So you can be direct and sometimes you can be quite soft about it. But my simplest answer is earn the right first before you can give that feedback. If you've earned that right, it really doesn't matter whether it's direct or not, because you've earned the right for that buyer to hear you out and really take it on board.
We're back to earning the right. I mean, there is so much that comes back to that. You can't just wade in and do this stuff because you read it in a book and somebody you know has done it and it worked well for him or her. Earn the right. And again, as you keep coming back to, it's the relationship. No, sorry. So you talk about the competence and character.
Yes.
Yeah, I talk about task and relationship, but it's essentially a
Yes.
very similar way of putting it. It's use those elements. You know your stuff. You do what you say you're going to do. Yeah, you're reliable. All those things, and the way you do it as a person. That list of 7 now
8
elements. 8. Sorry, 8. It was. Oh, I messed up my own exclusive. Yeah. That will put you in a better position to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. One thing to think about, of course, is, as I said, think about the personality, the social style of the person you're talking to, right? Driver versus analytical versus amiable, etc. If you're talking to an amiable where they're all about relationships and loyalty and they don't like conflict very much, of course, be a bit softer in how you share that feedback. But like I said, you still have to earn the right first, and then think about the more advanced stuff, which is what's the social style of the person I'm speaking with.
Analytical, take a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Show data.
Prove more data.
Yeah. That's the Miller Reese model, but there are other models like the PCM, etc., where there are 6 characters and stuff like that. Use the one that's comfortable for you, but be cognizant of the social style of the person you're speaking with, because that's how they view the world, right? So yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, there's so much good stuff. So much good stuff here. I just want to spend a tiny little bit more time on one other element of this, because you mentioned it earlier. You'd sort of flagged up as change and comfort with change as being another important part. I mean, they all are, and they're all interlinked, which is the sort of the beauty here. So just, I'm trying to what I wrote down when you said, "Oh, that's to do with change and how people view that." What was your thinking around that?
You talk about the 3 types of change styles: resistor, resistor, adapter, and initiator. I'm trying to remember what it is I said earlier about it.
Let me go back.
Yeah, sure. But let me think about the change. From the buyer's perspective, look, we all know that change is a difficult thing. And I was mentored by Matt Dixon, who co-authored the Challenger Sale. I was a sales director at the company that created that. And they talk about the pain of same being greater than the pain of change. And change is a risky maneuver for anyone. Even those who are seen as innovative and enjoy new things and like change, etc., there's still a certain element of risk towards that change. And it comes back to that trust aspect. Right? Do I trust the brand, the person, the business, that if I do go through this risky change, that they're going to minimize that risk? They're going to make me feel comfortable about that risk. They're going to support me when things go good as well as when things go bad, right? And when someone makes change, what's interesting is that we always assess whether that change has been worthwhile or not, whether you do that yourself and you self-reflect, or your boss is going to start assessing you. When I talk about change, I say, as a salesperson, you've got to remember a couple of things that are really important. Number one, the buying process is a horrendous experience. The more complex, the more horrendous, right? There's so much complexity. Buyers really don't enjoy it. They really don't, because it takes time out of their day, and they're exposing themselves. Because if they make that decision, even as a collective group, they know that all eyes are on them. And the reason why, which is the second part, is when they buy something, they're putting their reputation and their very identity on the line. Right? So, for example, if they make the wrong decision and it harms their reputation, for some people, that reputation is their identity. It's their whole world. It's how they identify themselves to everyone else. When they say, "Who are you?" they say, "I'm this person," right? And that reputation is so important. It could also mean that your buyer could lose their job, right? And I think salespeople really don't appreciate this. When they make a decision, they could lose their job over this, because it doesn't mean that it has to be a big spend, but the impact of that spend could be big. And if they lose their job, firstly, they might lose their identity. But what if they lose their income, and that income is so important to looking after their family, their partner, their children, whoever it might be? That could be everything to them. So change isn't about the scientific element of thinking about change. It is about the very personal impact that change will have. That's how I view change. Yes, there are some elements of complexity in going through the change and bringing everyone on board, etc. But at its core, you need to understand those fundamentals, right? It's risky. People are afraid of it, even if you're used to it or enjoy it. And secondly, there is this very personal impact that it will have on the buyer. And I think salespeople really don't appreciate that at large, and they're not trained to do that. So it's not their fault. They're just not trained to do so, which is why we talk about trust, which is why trust is so fundamental, which is why win-win is so fundamental, because this can impact their whole world.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the training is challenge the status quo. I mean, every sales course will have that written in it somewhere, and you'll say, yeah, well, what happens if you don't do this, and all that good stuff. And look, at least that's better than not talking about it. But it's a bit like an iceberg, isn't it? That's the sort of the bit above the waves that you see, which is well, yeah, that's kind of the impact on the organization and
Yes.
it's that emotional stuff, it's that personal stuff below that if I'm the guy that made the decision, this is a massive mistake. Yes, even if I don't lose my job, I'll still get tarred with a brush. Yeah, you bought that rubbishy solution, didn't you? It's a big one, and I think you're right. I don't think we prep people enough to have those conversations.
Yeah, and
They're
there's two.
hard. They're tough conversations to have, aren't they? Very,
Very
very tough.
tough, very tough, because you can't get to that level without establishing trust. I mean, I know it always comes back to that, but you can't get to that level without doing so, because there are two types of value. There's business value, and then there's emotional value, right? And CB did a study before they were acquired by Gartner. I think the number was 68% of buyers who saw they called it personal value, as well as business value, are more likely to buy. Right? And they're more likely to spend more but pay a higher price than those that don't see personal value. They just see business value. So what I tell salespeople is, you might think that they're buying for the business, but I will bet you all the money I have that it always leads down to their personal value and their personal circumstances. They will not make a decision if it's incongruent or if it risks something that happens in their personal life. Even an entrepreneur whose business is their very world and existence, there is a personal link to that success of the business, right? So that's why change is so. That's why change. That's how I view change. That's how I view when salespeople ask buyers to make some form of change, particularly if they're going with your solution over someone else that they currently have. You've got to be aware of what personal impact this is going to have on them, because that's going to be the main driver of their decision-making process.
Yeah. No. Again, it's I kind of often reflect back on some of the very early sales training I had. So beginning of the 90s, we're just coming out of the 80s, close, objection handling. And
Yes.
look, we don't throw the baby out totally with the bathwater, because there's still some good stuff.
Yes.
And there's a phrase which a guy who trained me said at the time, and I still use, which is emotion drives motion.
Yes.
I like the
It's a
little
good one.
rhymey thing. Of course I do. But it does. That's what, if you tap into that and understand that, well, emotion could well stop motion was another way of thinking about that. So,
Yeah, another way I've heard it is emotion, right? Energy in motion, right?
oh,
So
take that one
that's
as
the
well.
other way that I've heard that. But you're absolutely right. The emotion drives the decision, and you're not going to ask someone outright for them to share that with you, because that can be very personal. I mean, you have to build a whole level of trust with them for that. But you can infer a lot of that with them. You can infer that by how they talk about their job role or their career, or how
Yeah.
they might talk about other circumstances. You can kind of infer that and see, well, what's this person really worried about more than anything else? And you can use that language that's aligned to those values.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, again, I'm just thinking about some guys I was training recently, and we were at a very basic level, and I was saying, intelligent questions to ask people what are their KPIs.
Oh, yes.
They're business drivers, and some of them are like, oh no, I'm not sure I can ask that. And if that's the mentality, that we can't even ask what are you employed to do, to get into that deeper conversation, there is a lot of work to do. There is a lot,
There's a
but I guess
Now that's a
that's why we're
mindset
here.
issue. No, that's it. And by the way, Fred, that's a mindset thing,
Yeah.
right? That is a mindset issue, because I ask C-level people, what are their KPIs? I go even a step further. And by the way, I haven't got the same. I didn't have the same level of experience as they did, right? This was earlier on. I asked the KPIs, but then I asked further, which is, how are you bonused, right?
Yep.
How what will determine whether you're going to get bonus and whether you're going to either keep your role or become promoted and have that closer relationship with the CEO or your boss,
Yep.
right? And there's nothing wrong with answering that question if you have the right mindset, right? Most of the time when someone says, "Oh, I can't do that," there's an inferiority element there, right? They
Yeah.
feel that they can't. But I tell you something, not most, the ones that I've engaged with, when I ask that question, they're like, "Whoa, this person is asking something pretty refreshing here."
Yeah.
Right? They're not assuming that these things are going to be important just because it was important to someone else for my job title. They're really asking about me now, right? And there's no point trying to sell the values of a solution if that person is not even if it's not even in their MBOs, their management by
Mm.
objectives.
Mm.
If it's not in there, then why would they even bother prioritizing what you're offering? They just wouldn't. They will seek something else. So I think, Fred, that's a mindset issue, not necessarily a skills issue.
That is also a separate podcast.
That is a
So
separate podcast.
we've got two, haven't we? We've got a mindset one, and we've got the one where I went, oh no, that's a bit of a can of worms, which is
That's a big one. A lot of sales skills, a lot of the challenges that salespeople have is not necessarily about skills, right? Because there's a lot of training out there on skills. Not all are great for the times that we live in. I accept that, but a lot of them are still very good. The problem isn't that. The problem is mindset, right? They don't present the best version of themselves. They actually go into the meeting having defeated themselves before the meeting even starts.
mm.
Right? And then there's no hope really, because all the skills in the world, you just won't know which one to pull and which one to use because you're already in a bad mindset. So yeah, that is a separate podcast. In fact, I did a Clubhouse session just last night on that very topic.
Ah. And you can't record that, so people are going to have to
No.
come and find you and
They
work
have
out
to,
when you're next on podcast and talk on a
yeah.
Clubhouse and doing that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, I'm on there pretty much every day now.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh,
So it's a fantastic because it invites debate now, right? Right now it's a debate between just you and me, but in Clubhouse you can have a debate with 50, 1,000, 2,000 people, right? And
it's not really a debate, is it? We're violently agreeing.
well, we're agreeing, but it's definitely inviting a lot of questions
Yeah,
from other
yeah,
people,
yeah.
right? So yeah,
Okay, so I mean, as we better start to wrap up. Really, I've got an eye on the clock now. But
sure.
so people will find you on Clubhouse. Any particular area? Or do you just kind of wander? I don't personally use it. Do you wander the halls, or have you got a fixed room that
So
you
you
have?
can search for specific people and then follow
Ah,
them. And what happens is when you follow them, you'll have the bell icon, which is the alert notification. Always click always on there. You get three options, which is never, sometimes, and always. Click the always one because then you're up to date with what they're doing. And what happens is I create rooms, and they will be scheduled rooms at certain times.
uh-huh.
And then you can add that to your calendar, and you can join when that room starts. So you can create rooms. So Clubhouse, Moeed Amin, I'm the only person on that app, I believe, with that name, so I'm easy to find. You can also connect with me if you go to my company's website, proverbialdoor.com. There's a ton of information there. We teach about, not just sales, but also the peripheral elements of sales. So we have interviews with people on body language and human behavior. We have even health and focus, right? So you'll be able to perform. We even
Mm.
have things, whole business acumen is a big one,
Mm.
right? So I have an ex-VP of JP Morgan who teaches salespeople how to, or helps my community read financial statements so that you can understand the story of the business. So there's a ton of stuff there. You
Yeah.
can see me on LinkedIn as well, /Moeed Amin. You can even contact me directly if you want, right? mamin@proverbialdoor.com. And if anyone listening to this would like to talk with me further, one of the things I'd be more than happy to give out is, a free 30-minute coaching session, right? So this is not a click and bait switch or anything like that. I will treat you as a client, and you will get downloadable material based upon your circumstance that I'll send over to you. But I'll treat you as a client for that 30 minutes. If you wish to work with me afterwards, that's entirely up to you. But that 30 minutes, I'm yours to help you as much as I can in your sales and growth profession.
Oh, that is very generous, and I think, well, I hope, and I think you've built enough trust in the podcast. You've
Thank
shared
you.
enough and earned the right. You've definitely
Thank
earned
you
the right, and now that's cool. We'll drop those links into the
for sure.
into the show notes. Okay, last question
Mm,
is if we were allowed to jump on a plane and go somewhere to help some people out, so just to do a bit of good, should we go to Africa, Asia, or Latin America?
whoa, that's a good question.
Yeah, if we're gonna donate a bit of our time, do some good stuff, like the good characters that we are. So we have those eight.
I'm not as knowledgeable on what's really going on in all of those continents. My instinct says Africa.
Okay.
The reason why is so there's research out there that looks at COVID and the decisions we made about COVID, and that's a very, very big can of worms. But there's research out there that says that 100 million people are going to die from the impact of the decisions that other countries have made about COVID, especially the lockdowns. And Africa holds the big brunt of that. It's also resource rich. It's also an incredibly beautiful continent. And there's an incredible amount of enterprise and people there who desire to do good and to contribute positively to the world. So I think there's a lot of good that can be done from going to Africa and helping out people there. So I'm leaning more towards that one. But
Okay.
my caveat is I'm in no way deeply knowledgeable about
No, it
Latin America, Asia, etc. I could be doing someone a disservice here, but that's my
no,
instinct.
it was just need to choose one of three, because what I do is I believe in business for good. So
Yeah,
I'm part of
agreed.
an organization called B1G1,
Okay.
which is a way of being able to donate impacts which are aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Mm.
And so just to say thank you for coming on the podcast, what I'm doing with guests is asking them that question. And then what I will do is look at, I've got 3 impacts set up. I'll look at the one that's aligned to Africa, which is actually books. So it's about
Oh,
education.
wow.
But
Excellent.
we're in education, so it just makes most sense to do that. So it's books to school children in Kenya. So I'll make a
Oh,
donation as a
that
thank
that
you.
I really admire that. I really admire that, and it's interesting. The more we're talking, the more I see how we're aligned we are, because I donate 1% of all my revenue to charities, the ones that I feel the most passionate about, and for me, it's children and the future of children.
There we go.
So one is Underground Railroad, um, and it's an incredible charity headed up by an ex-CIA person, and they help children of abuse, slave trade, and they go in and actually rescue them. And the other one is a charity that helps, and it's based in the UK, helps children who are exposed or experiencing bullying. And
Oh,
that's very
cool.
personal to me because I experienced that for over 5 years when I was young. So I give back to that, and one of the things I'm going to approach and see what we can do is to start provide therapy and start to provide some support around how to minimize the impact that will have on their mindset for when they become adults. So I'm aligned with you, right? So 1% of all my revenue goes to them. I don't talk about it on the website. Maybe I will in the future. I kind of do that myself, but it's interesting that you do that. I really admire that, Fred.
The only reason I do is because there are 17 sustainable development goals that the UN came up with back in 2015. That if we can have an impact on all of these, the world is a better place by
That's
2030.
incredible. Yeah, that's
So I
admirable.
align to number 4, which is education. Number 17, it's sharing the partnership. So even just by
Nice.
talking about it now, I'm actually killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm achieving on 2 goals. So that's why I've started to include it on at the end of the podcast as well. So
That's amazing. That's amazing, Fred.
that's cool. Good. Look, thank you so much for your time, and I am sure we're going to be speaking again soon.
My pleasure, and I hope that was useful for all your listeners. And like I said, if anyone listening has any questions or would like to delve into any of those details further with me, not even as a client, but just as an interested party, I freely give my time when I have it to do that. So, hopefully this was useful for everyone. And thank you, Fred, for inviting me. This was an incredibly enjoyable session. You asked some great questions.
No, thank you. You answered them better.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Take care. Thank you.